Hello, everyone. My name is Shannon Prather, and I'm the Marketing Cultivator at GIS Inc. I'll be your moderator, and I'd like to thank you for joining us on today's broadcast titled Esri's ArcGIS Enterprise, Hosted and Managed Cloud Strategies. Today's presentation will explain what the cloud is, per se, security reasons we hear throughout the industry in commercial, local, and government entities, show you a variety of cloud examples and tools to consider, examine the true ROI of migrating to the cloud, and finally discuss how you can get started. We do encourage you to post questions throughout the webinar. We'll respond to all questions at the end as time allows. At the end, please spend just a minute to answer a few questions and answers in that survey. Don't worry if you have to step away from your screen during the broadcast. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted online. You'll receive a link to the recording via email early next week. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, GIS Inc. has solved WHERE problems geospatially for 28 years. We've got over 160 professionals with one core purpose: to create insight through location technology. With that geospatial focus, we help state and local and federal governments as well as commercial industries. GIS Inc. is proud to be a part of Esri's partner network and as an Esri Platinum partner. Our company holds release-ready specialty as well as many other designations and work with customers across the country to maximize their use of the ArcGIS platform. Now, without further delay, I'm excited to welcome our presenter, Steve Mulberry, Senior Solution Architect and Sales Engineer at GIS Inc. Steve currently serves as a Senior Enterprise Architect at Geographic Information Systems Incorporated. He has over 28 years of experience in GIS, creating and architecting enterprise systems. He started his GIS career in the United States Marine Corps as a cartographer and terrain analyst. And since finishing his commitment, he has been employed by both state and local governments as well as private GIS consulting firms such as Esri, where he spent 11 years as a solution engineer. More recently, Steve has focused his attention on IoT and sensor-based technology and helping organizations find real value implementing these workflows to improve efficiencies both indoors and outdoors. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you all enjoy the webinar. Steve?
All right, thank you, Shannon, and thank you for that introduction. I thought it'd be a good idea if we kind of started off this presentation with the concept of, why should you listen to me? I know Shannon went through sort of a bio there real quick, but I think it's important to understand why should you listen to GIS Inc. Why should you listen to me in particular about this topic? And I want to kind of share with you some of our experience, some of our ideas around cloud computing. We've been a business partner since 1991 of Esri, and as of lately, when Esri started to designate their partners, we've been a platinum business partner from the creation of that system there. So we're very intimate into the platform. We wake up every day thinking about implementing the Esri platform, integrating it with other business systems, and staying on top of the technology alongside Esri as they release new versions of their platform. We are early adopters of the cloud platform. Over about 12 or 13 years ago, Dan Levine and I stood up our first cloud solution using Amazon Web Services, and we've been doing it ever since. We have designed and deployed and managed many solutions across different cloud providers like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Data Pipes, others out there. So we're very familiar with how to use that platform, how to get to the ArcGIS Enterprise into that space, and to leverage the services and the capabilities that come with these cloud providers. And with that said, we're definitely AWS and Microsoft Azure partners. We team up with these companies per se. I know there's others out there, and we'll talk about those as well. But we deploy on both platforms. In fact, as a company ourselves, we have moved a lot of our business systems into the cloud to help with the scalability, the management, and the security of those systems. And finally, we have over 40 architects and engineers that specifically work with our cloud deployments, with our customers that want to deploy ArcGIS platform in the cloud and other services and offerings that those providers provide for us. So with that said, let's kind of look at the topics that we're going to go through today. So I want to start off with, well, what is the cloud? I don't want to make any assumptions, so we'll start off with some basic discussion around the cloud and what it is and why should we use the cloud. We'll spend a lot of time talking about security. I know this is a big topic, and it should be. Right? We should be discussing this. We should be putting best practices into place here when we talk about cloud deployments. And then we'll move into some of those examples of cloud deployments and look at how other folks might be using these platforms and look at some tools that are out there for you to leverage, some produced by Esri, some produced by these cloud providers. And then we'll close up with some discussion around return on investment by leveraging the cloud. So keep these topics in mind. And as we go through these, I want to have this context of the ArcGIS Enterprise. And we talk about the cloud and why and how and security and deployment and tools and ROI. It's going to be focused around the ArcGIS Enterprise platform, okay? And so before I dive deep into this, I like to get sort of a sense of you folks that are on the webinar today and how you might be leveraging the cloud. So I'm going to turn it over to Shannon real quick to ask a quick polling question.
Thanks, Steve. You also should see the poll on your screen now. Do you use the cloud to host ArcGIS Enterprise deployment? And if so, which vendor do you use? I also want to use this minute while you guys are answering this question, just to remind you to submit your questions into the GoToMeeting panel. If you have any questions for Steve, we'll answer those at the conclusion of this webinar. Right. We'll go ahead and close the polls. Thanks to all who were able to participate.
All right, thank you, Shannon. So it's kind of interesting to kind of see those of you that are using the cloud now, over about 70% not applicable yet. So it'll be interesting to see how you take this discussion, some of the things you might learn from the cloud infrastructure and how we kind of see folks using it from our perspective, right? The types of customers and how they're leveraging it and using that. So let's get started here. So what is the cloud? It's always interesting how terminology gets created, right? Where these terms come from. And over the years, this term cloud has kind of been, no pun intended, floating around there, meaning different things. And in some cases, we just expect it now to just work, right? And we expect it to work well and be up and running 24/7 and give us access to the things that we consider cloud usage there. And a lot of us don't even want to worry about it. Right? We don't want to think about it. We just want to use it and leverage what it has to offer us. And so it depends on who you ask what the cloud means, right? So if I ask my children what the cloud is, they may say things like Facebook or Instagram, Minecraft, those kinds of things, words with friends, those kinds of stuff out there. If you ask one of our solution engineers here at GIS Sync what the cloud is, they may say, oh, it's Amazon Web Services, or it's Microsoft Azure, or it's Data Pipes, or it's Google Cloud, or it's those providers that give us the services there. Or if you ask one of our solution architects or software engineers, they may say, oh, it's software as a service, or it's infrastructure as a service, or platform as a service, right? All those as a service technologies out there. But if you ask my mom what the cloud is, she might say, oh, it's just a cloud, it's just a rain cloud. But in all cases, there is some truth behind each one of these, right? And you might say, well, the rain cloud, really? Well, hold that thought for a second, because I'll return to that here in a bit. But think about these definitions, or how people might think or perceive the cloud to be. I guess, but there's one common factor here, is that it's accessible over the internet, right? We can get to these solutions and these softwares and these packages and these tools and these providers and these platforms all through the internet. Okay, if you ask that same question to, say, Esri, what do they call the cloud? Well, in the past, they might say, well, this is ArcGIS Online, right? This gives us the ability to run the platform in an online environment. Well, that has evolved over the years, and now you're going to start hearing a term called geospatial cloud, right? Which is a combination of networked of secure services, right? It's access to storage appliances, allow me to store big data or tile services or vector information. It's access to data and map services. It's access to solutions and templates and those kinds of those kinds of services out there that's all built on top of the platform but running in the cloud. Again, all accessible over the internet. Okay, so we get this geospatial cloud or ArcGIS Online that gives us the ability to securely host, manage, publish, and share our content through the applications and templates that come with the ArcGIS Online platform. Now, if we kind of make this analogy jump back to the rain cloud concept, if you were like me as a kid, I used to like to look up into the sky when it was raining and see all these hundreds of thousands of raindrops dropping down from the cloud. And so think of the cloud itself as literally hundreds of thousands of computing services or storage services or software services that are accessible throughout the country, throughout the world globally, in this sort of cloud environment that I, as an end user, can access that over the internet and take advantage of the service that's most that I need most. Is it computing? Is it storage? Is it some software components, right? Is it shared environment? It's having access to all those services and allowing someone else to manage those services. And so we have a lot of providers out there that are giving us access to those worlds, like Amazon through Amazon Web Services, Microsoft through Azure, and Google through their Google Cloud. And again, there's others out. There's lots of them out there. And I'm not here to try to pinpoint any one is better than the other, but they offer different things or provide different types of services. And some just focus on software, like a Salesforce, right? It's a software as a service running in the cloud. They specify they hone in on one type of activity. And if you look at RightScale's cloud report from 2017 to 2018, the sort of this enterprise cloud adoption from the public standpoint, right? These public cloud providers like Amazon and Azure. You can see their adoption rate here from last year or from 2017 to 2018. And it's interesting if you look at RightScale's reports back to 2016 and 15 and 14, the adoption rate is growing and growing faster, right? This technology is not a fad, right? It's in place. It's being used constantly. It's being used throughout all industries. The gaming industry, the retail, the merchant industries, the Netflix, all those kinds of folks are leveraging cloud providers and cloud technology to support their business workflows. The challenges that we've seen at GIS Inc. working with our customers over the last decades is sort of this fear of technology. So there's a gentleman by the name of Brian David Johnson. He's a futurist at Intel that does nothing but study and predict how people will interact with technology. He kind of writes about this evolution of fear in the use of technology. And when we typically, as people, start off with pure fear, right? This thing, it's not for me. It's not going to work. It's deadly in some cases, right? We don't want to have anything to do with it. We move from that fear to sort of a personal struggle, right? To accept this personally and how this might affect us as an individual. And then we just right out deny its use. And I've actually been in discussions with IT directors at different organizations that literally have used that phrase right there. I will never use it, meaning the cloud. And then we evolve into the acceptance, right? What's the big worry about? This thing is the next best thing since sliced bread. But we've seen this evolution of the fear of technology, and from when first the computers came out, and then the internet, and then smartphones, and wearable devices, and now the cloud. We sort of all, if we kind of look back at our personal, evolvement through the use of technology. I can personally say, yeah, I went through some of these phases and stages here. but it's not ending, right? We've got big data that we're working with now. We've got virtual reality. We've got Internet of Things, right? So this technology and the fear of technology, we've got to learn how to evolve through from fear to acceptance a little more rapidly to kind of leverage this technology. But I think it all boils down to this fear of technology. It all boils down to our personal information, right? Having that data breach, having that sensitive information get accessed by others, and this perceived notion that the cloud is more vulnerable to that environment is what kind of keeps a lot of us from leveraging that technology. So let's look at some of the use cases. Why would you use the cloud, right? So first off, the flexibility. I think the key here is being able to scale very quickly and to adapt to the situation and the event that is taking place. So things like bandwidth and server capacity can be very flexible, and I can scale up and scale down as needed to support my workload or the event that's happening. Those kinds of things can be managed and monitored very quickly. Disaster recovery. The cloud gives us this geographic redundancy. We see a lot of folks leveraging just the cloud for this purpose alone, taking my information and my data that's on premise and moving it to a cloud backup service that gives me that disaster recovery model and plan, right? Gives me the geographic redundancy of taking data from on premise to the cloud. I used to work for a local government 15, 20 years ago, where when the siren went off and we were to evacuate, the IT folks would run into the data center and pull out hard drives, put them in a basket, and run out of the building. Right? Those days are gone. We shouldn't be doing those kinds of steps. That should not be our disaster recovery model. We should leverage the cloud, if for anything, for the disaster recovery side of it. There's this concept of automatic updates. Now, I know this could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it, but things like operating systems, security patches, those kinds of things can be automated at the provider level and take that headache out of me. But I can control and I can manage when those happen and how those happen and schedule those automatic updates. Capital expenditure. This is probably the biggest one, right? It's the cloud gives us the opportunity to pay as you go and pay for what you use, and gives me the ability again to have that flexibility into expanding or scaling my site as I go through, not from a procurement cycle, like every 3 years I'm going to buy new hardware, but on a daily cycle. Do I need something more today than I did yesterday based on the event or the load that I'm trying to service? Work from anywhere, right? As long as we have an internet connectivity, there's mobile apps, there's desktop apps, I can work from anywhere. Again, and this could be that single point of failure, that bottleneck, right? Let's be honest here. If I have internet connectivity, the cloud's great, but if I lose internet connectivity, then how do I handle that? And we'll talk about that here in a second. So the work from anywhere also gives us the ability to increase our collaboration. It's not only can I work anytime and anywhere, but I can work from different devices. I can bring up my smartphone and I can reboot my server that's in Amazon Web Services and manage those kind of administration tasks from anywhere. And I think another big one here is free of infrastructure. I think people don't analyze these aspects enough when they do the cost estimation for going from on-prem to cloud. But it's the physical space, it's the power, it's the hardware, it's the cooling, it's the heating, it's all these components, the security around all that that really impact the cost associated for hosting and managing your infrastructure from on-prem to the cloud. And then I think finally the security, and this is where I want to kind of spend some time on, the security around cloud computing and providers that give us access to those systems. Now, I'm going to throw a couple things out here. We can all go on Google. We can search real quick. We can find all the different breaches that have happened over the years from cloud. Here's just a couple of them out there. From a sort of a state and local government, federal government kind of standpoint, there's vulnerability out there, and I'm not just saying on-premise, but cloud as well. And we're going to talk about both of these nuances here and how to plan for security in both environments. But we at GIS Inc. have some real investment in some of these areas here. And it was interesting when the city of Atlanta went down because of this ransom attack, that there was a particular department inside the city that had chosen to push their GIS infrastructure into the cloud, and they stayed up and running during the time period that Atlanta was working to get recover from this attack. But we've seen this all over the place, right? Some of the big ones out like Microsoft in 2010, Dropbox, LinkedIn in 2012, Home Depot, Yahoo, Apple iCloud, they've all had some vulnerability with data breaches. What's interesting, and if you take the time to kind of read through each one of these articles, each one of these reports on these big vendors that were breached, in most cases it was human error. In almost all the cases, it was human error. It was passwords weren't strong enough. It was contractors leaving laptops exposed or bringing data from outside of a cloud environment infrastructure to the outside world and leaving that laptop exposed, putting data on thumb drives and things like that, that allowed a lot of these breaches to take place. It was not a shortcoming in the cloud infrastructure itself. So there are some definite value to kind of think about the cloud as a way to increase your security. And I want to focus in on that here a little bit. I want to kind of talk through sort of 4 features that demonstrate why the fear of the cloud is more of a myth than reality, right? There are these myths out there that cloud computing is inherently less secure than traditional approaches, and this paranoia is due to largely the fact that this approach itself just feels insecure. Right, I'm putting my data, I'm storing my data on servers and systems that I don't have control of, and I understand that, and I know that. I've talked to folks over the years about, that having that security of physically being able to go in and touch these systems and environments. So let's talk about some of these. So the first one is the strong perimeters and surveillance. So these buildings, these service providers, these cloud providers have very secure infrastructure. I've had the privilege of working in a couple of these places, and physically to get to them, they're kind of hidden behind trees and hills, and there's no big signs that say this is the data provider building. It's very inconspicuous places. Strong surveillance cameras, security cameras, security guards going through these places. When I went in, I had to check in with a guard. I had to do a thumbprint. I had to do a retinal scan. I had to cleaned off, the air cleansing, so there's no static electricity on me. If you bring any hardware into these places, you got to take it out of the cardboard boxes. It's got to be clean. It's got to come in through a different entrance, so there's no debris left on these devices. So very, very strong perimeters, very strong surveillance in these areas. The controlled access it surpasses any IT data center that is housed on premise, right? In most cases, there's just a door between all the employees and the data center. And that is not the case at these cloud provider environments. Very, very controlled access. And in all cases, these cloud providers provide these cybersecurity experts that thoroughly understand the vulnerabilities and continually work to increase the security and to make things stronger and faster and more secure. And they constantly go through these frequent auditing, right? They have to be audited on a regular basis, right? And I've worked at the state, I've worked at the municipality, and I've worked at the federal level. And it's really hard to get all 4 of these at any one of these locations. And I understand that. In fact, in some cases, and I know this is a representation of that, but I've actually been in some places where they've had the front door to the data centers propped open by a fan to keep it cool. Right now, that may not be the case everywhere, and it's obviously different for each individual. But this picture is not uncommon, right? This is not just a picture I found off the internet. This is real. It's reality. In some cases, this is how it is. And so these cloud providers, give us through these 4 features here a very strong sense of security. Now, there's still some vulnerability, right? Let's be honest here. That there's still ways for those who want to find avenues and paths to try to breach our information. And Alert Logic creates this cloud security report that shows us the biggest security incident types out there are web attacks, web application attacks, and usually those are through SQL injection, trying to corrupt our data or breach our data so they can get that information out. But if you look on the right there, it's kind of interesting to break down these public clouds like the Amazons and the Azures and the data pipes and things like that out there versus on-premise versus an on-premise hosted private cloud, and then a hybrid solution. Those that are using on-premise and cloud tend to be the most offenders of these incident counts, right? And I suspect that's because of the on-premise security model itself, but the having to update the cloud with the information, so pushing that data from on-premise to the cloud can be intercepted, can be breached in those aspects. But the cloud isn't perfect, right? I'm not here to say this perfect. I'll be the first one to say that, but there are some measures that are taken that go way beyond that we can do on-premise here. So let's talk about that for a second here. This concept of data breaching, data access, because in reality, right, the physical location of our data does not matter, right? It matters less than how we give access to that information and those around it. So it's very important for us to take the time to look at our security model, right? We should be focusing on the infrastructure and not our security model. We should be focusing on a well-defined execute security strategy and using those right tools. Let the infrastructure be done by the cloud providers. Let us focus on how we're going to secure this information, how we're going to give access to it, how we're going to make sure that the data that we're providing is cleansed and clean before we serve that out to those who need to use it. And so we should be focusing our time on the requirements for security and governance and controlling access and doing these vulnerability and penetration tests, with our data. So if you talk to any cloud provider, they're going to tell you that they have their responsibility, right? Their responsibility is the infrastructure, right? The building, the power, the bandwidth, the connectivity, the uptime, those kinds of things. But it's our responsibility for everything else. It's how we configure those systems. It's how we configure the firewalls. It's how we configure and control the access to the information. It's how we expose applications to. It's how we, track our security credentials. And do we do single sign-on? Do we do double authentication? All those kinds of things. We have our responsibility in securing access to information just as much as the cloud providers have in providing the secure infrastructure. And so we got to keep that in mind when we do anything in the cloud, because there's still vulnerabilities. And I can have the most secure infrastructure, but if I don't provide adequate security into that, and I don't secure my firewalls correctly, then there's going to be data breaches. And so what these cloud providers have done is they create these security offerings out there to help enable organizations to focus on their mission more so than getting distracted by building out and managing in-house IT solutions. And so some of the popular ones out there are from Microsoft, who offer two. They offer the Azure government and the government DoD, which is sort of a designated region that that are physically separated architecture that meet the U.S. Department of DoD security requirements for cloud computing, specifically related to data designated as DoD Impact Level 5. And so Microsoft has reached that level. There's actually 6 levels out there. The 6 deals with more of the classified and secret information. But Microsoft provides this level 5 access to these 2 services. Amazon right now has their Gov Cloud, which is level 4. They're working on level 5. But if you have information like health information or personal information that needs to be secured, these cloud providers are creating these offerings, these platforms to extend that security model into their offerings, and then gives us the ability to then build on top of that. But what I'd like to introduce, though, is this concept. So say we've got these cloud providers that are providing the infrastructure security. We've done our due diligence and we've created our security and our governance and those kinds of things. But what about the actual data itself, right? The points, lines, and polygons that represent the information that we're sharing out. This information can be very sensitive information. At GIS Inc, we've been working through this concept of masking our data. Well, basically what that means is, creating this, this locationality, this representation of these locations that gives us the ability to do, extensive analysis while preserving the anonymity of the information itself, especially if we're talking about patient health information or personal identifiable information. Those things, we need that point level accuracy to do our analysis, but we've got to maintain the anonymity of those individuals so that that information doesn't get out. And so what we've done is we created this process and this tool called Map Mask that helps us provide this geomasking to this information by using anonymity statistics, providing these models to help preserve that information, that location information, but hide the actual physical location of that information. So there's several levels of security that we need to think about here, right? The infrastructure itself, our governance and security, and then the actual information, how we display that on maps and the products that we produce and give to our clients. So let's move from this sort of security discussion over to the deployment. Talk about how ArcGIS Enterprise and its base components fit into this model. So we're going to do a quick review here. ArcGIS Enterprise and its base components. There's 4 components that make up the ArcGIS Enterprise. It's web adapter, portal, server, and data store. Now these are the 4 base components, but you can build on top of this. You can have things like GeoEvent server and analytics server and other roles that play in this model, but we're going to focus in on the base deployment here. And I'm going to use the Amazon Web Services approach in building out an example of how you would deploy the base components inside of a cloud environment. In this case, Amazon Web Services. So typically you start off by assigning it to a region. Now there's lots of regions that Amazon provides, and Microsoft does the same thing, and others out there too. So I'm not discounting them. I'm just using this one as an example. But you pick the region that's going to best serve your users. Within that region, then you can define an availability zone, so the physical location, and you establish the virtual private cloud. So this is your first level of security. From there, you can define a gateway, which allows us to use services like Route 32 to manage our domain name. Now, some of you may use other sources to manage your domain names, but Amazon provides a complete environment for managing a domain name, the gateway, the private clouds. From there, then we put in an elastic load balancer where we can control the access over a secure port, in this case, port 433. And so at this level, we've introduced 3 levels of security already before we've even done anything with the ArcGIS Enterprise components. From there, we can create a public subnet. With inside there, we create 2 things: this network address translator, which then allows all the communication coming in from the load balancer into that server. We can control that. We can see who's coming in. We can control that. We can manage how that communication is handled. Push that over to our web adapter, which we know that the web adapter is really a reverse proxy. Again, another level. So we've added 2 more levels of security, up to about 5 or 6 now. And then we create a private subnet where we put the rest of the components in. So we have this concept of about 8 or 9 levels of security just to get access to our environment, and we can deploy the components of ArcGIS Enterprise in this pattern. Now, just by itself here, there's a lot of high availability already built into the Amazon infrastructure. Okay, so things like the elastic load balancer, the internet gateway, and Route 53, and the EC2s, right? Those things, there's a lot of high availability already built into that. But what if you wanted to increase that capability, go from like a 95, 96% uptime to a 99 point something, right? If you look at this current infrastructure and you run this through the Amazon calculator, I wanted to give you guys just a quick example of what this might cost per month to host this entire environment. That's including the bandwidth and the storage and the IP addresses and all the detailed monitoring behind that. It's very cost effective to set this up. And once I have this up, and running, I could mirror this and put this into another availability zone to get that geographic redundancy. So I have it in 2 different zones now, and one could be my active production, and one could be my passive production, which also acts as my disaster recovery model. And when needed, I can turn one on, turn the other off. And again, I only get paid, only get charged for what I use. You know, paid for what you use, type of thing. So that passive production could be passive, could be turned off until needed, turned on, synchronize my information, my data and services, and then do maintenance on the other side, or do some patches or fixes and do the things that I need to do there. Now, this is a typical infrastructure, and we've done this for folks in different types of cloud provider environments. But we've also, for those who just need just the bare bones, what might that look like? And this is an example of just a quick a quick deployment of the enterprise platform to give me still access to those components that allow me to do and share and collaborate with information. So you can go from this type of environment up to as sophisticated as you need to based on your requirements out there. We also had another customer come to us and say, we're interested in understanding, we pay our IT department every year for use of servers and services and administration and bandwidth and power and all those kinds of things. What would it look like if we did that in the cloud? So we took their existing infrastructure, which was 2 ArcGIS servers, 1 image server, portal, GeoVent, and enterprise geodatabase environment, which we chose to use Postgres, which is a great option in the cloud environment. Then we added 3 additional servers, a file, that NAT, and a Bastion server, which is really a maintenance type server. With all that in place, we set up a 3-year subscription, again using the Amazon calculator. And in this case, there was an upfront cost of $45,000 with a monthly cost of $360, and their 3-year total estimate was $53,000, which came out to be a savings of $200,000 over the same 3-year period of doing this on premise. And so again, as you think through this, think about the administration, the physical space, electricity, the security, the bandwidth, support, all those things that play a role in managing your infrastructure inside an on-premise versus cloud. And there's several ways to make this happen and to architect out these solutions. And so take your time as you're kind of thinking through this process. So one question that I always get when I talk about cloud usage is, what happens to my desktop? Where does ArcMap go? Where does ArcGIS Pro go? And so what we're kind of having these discussions around is taking the desktop also to the cloud and using cloud services to run your desktop alongside your enterprise deployment. So things like Workspace or Amazon has an AppStream service that allows me to have a browser-like experience into my desktop GIS. And I can build out this AppStream to support the workflow that I'm interested in, whether it's 3D or imagery or caching. I can provision this on demand. I can have different configuration setups where some people are online, some people are offline. I can turn on, again, pay as you use. So turn things on and off as you work through this. Now, if you're still an ArcMap workspace, you still use the license manager for that purpose, for licensing ArcMap, then there's still that need, to support that license manager, and there's some different ways of managing that. But Pro now is all managed through Portal, and I can manage all my licenses through Portal, and I can have that total experience inside of my cloud environment. And so what I'm going to do is kind of show you how that kind of works. And so on the left, I've set up an app stream into ArcGIS Pro. And so when I first access the interface, the screen on the left is what I see, and I click on the application that it's exposed to me, which is ArcGIS Pro, and then it fires up inside of a browser. So let me show you how that looks. So this is an example. Hopefully you can see this is I'm running Firefox. I've connected to the app stream. I've clicked on the ArcGIS Pro. Now I have ArcGIS Pro running inside of my browser, and I can simply use ArcGIS Pro just like I would anything else. I can grab and access data. I connect right to my enterprise, or I can store and retrieve information inside of my enterprise geodatabase. I can leverage the storage mechanisms of these cloud environments, like at the S3 buckets and those kinds of things. I can work with my information. Again, I can identify. I can have my desktop experience just as I would as I was in the desktop. But my desktop now can be a thin client. It can be a Google Chrome laptop at this point. Okay, and so I can have these different kinds of experiences, but not have the overhead of the hardware needed to run these. And I can scale up as needed. So maybe a project today is more of a two-dimensional one, but my project next week is a 3D. Well, I just add more GPU or more RAM and use it for that week, and then spin it back down again. All right, so pay as you go and use as you need there within your environment. Okay, so which leads me to then, if you go back to the infrastructure we had in place, where does AppStream fit in? It fits right inside of your existing deployment, and AppStream sits alongside the other services that you're leveraging for your enterprise. It's connected directly to and can connect directly to the enterprise through their feature services, hosted feature services, or your enterprise geodatabase. And we have an example of that a number of years ago. The GIS manager for Peachtree City, Georgia, had made a decision to put the entire platform, her entire platform, in the cloud, desktop and the enterprise components. And some really strong tornadoes came through and knocked out both the city and county data centers, right? And in that process, though, they lost access to the on-premise infrastructure. But she was able to, with a generator and her laptop and a MiFi, connect directly into her cloud deployment and begin to create maps and provide information to first responders and the feds as they came in to help recover from these devastating tornadoes that took place there. So there's some real value. She talked about return on investment. She was able to very quickly provide information as needed in this type of situation. So again, if it's not fully embracing the cloud, at least use the cloud for disaster recovery and a geographic, redundancy in your information and services provided. So what do managed services look like from our perspective, right? We want to give you sort of the flexibility, right, to do what you can do and what you can take on. So we kind of broken this down into two sections: hosting versus management. So there's basically this idea of developing a plan. What do you need? What kind of load are you going to experience? So about high availability, disaster recovery, the number of users you're going to have access to. Do you need desktop and web and mobile? Right? We kind of develop this plan for leveraging the cloud to host the infrastructure there. We build this cost estimation. We look at different options for doing on-demand services versus provisioning services. Right? They give us that scale of economy when I go out over a 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year procurement of this environment. Once we build that plan, then there's this management, right? There's this deployment of the cloud. We have to install the stuff and configure it, get it ready. There's backup and maintenance plans that need to be in place. There's monitoring to make sure the health of these environments stay up and running. And most of these monitoring tools are already built into the cloud provider's platform, so we can keep track of CPU usage and RAM usage and storage usage and bandwidth, accessibility, things like that. There's plans around doing upgrades and patches, support and training. Right, we can be very flexible and help you get to whatever stage and let you take on whatever you want to take on from a hosting and a management concept. And be aware that there's tools out there. There's things like Esri provides ArcGIS Enterprise Cloud Builder, which is a tool that allows you to walk through and create a base deployment of ArcGIS Enterprise. Amazon Web Services has specific AMIs, these machine images that already have the Esri platform. They already have the Esri software built into these images. And there's other things like cloud formation templates, right? And I can use Cloud Builder for Amazon to build these in. Microsoft has the same thing with an Azure. They have images. You can use Cloud Builder. Esri is also providing tools like Chef. So you can build these recipes to automate the deployment process and manage that process. Microsoft has this concept of a scale set. So if I need to scale up and down based on the usage or the event. So maybe I have a small deployment during off season, but during hurricane season, I spin up a couple more to help manage the events that come through as people use the services that I provide. And then there's calculators out there. Both the big ones, Azure and Microsoft, provide these calculators to help us estimate the costs that it might take to stand up and work with within this environment and do what if scenarios. What if I had geo event? What if I had 2 servers? And what if I had an image server? And what if I had these different components? What's the best way to configure and get the maximum cost effectiveness from deploying these types of patterns out there? So how do you get started? What are some of the things you do? Well, preparation always requires taking the right steps and asking the right questions. And so we feel strongly that it's important to not, I don't want to say a needs assessment, but you definitely have to evaluate what you're trying to achieve from a cloud perspective. What do you want to offload to the cloud? What do you want to try to handle on premise? Do you want to have a hybrid approach? What's the best approach here, right? So evaluate that and document that. You can't get enough documentation. Document the pros and the cons and the things that have to change, the environment, document all that stuff, architect out the right solution then, right? Talk to the experts out there. Get some insight on how to best leverage these cloud services and get the biggest bang for your buck. And then educate, right? Share that vision with others in your organization. Help them understand the importance and the need and or the options and advantages of going this route. And then when it's come time to deploy it, use those and pattern your deployment off those best practices. We talk about production environments, we talk about high availability, disaster recovery. There's staging environments and dev environments, and leverage those best practices so that you can stay up and running and deploy the security models that you document, evaluate, and architect in the first 3 steps. And then when it's time to migrate your information, there's different ways of migrating and deploying those patterns out there. Just lift and ship it up, get everything that I have on premise, just bring it over to the cloud, or maybe take the option here to evaluate and make and maybe become more efficient in the way you're doing things. So change and refactor what you're doing on premise as you go to the cloud and leverage these services in the cloud that you may not have access to on premise. And then there's this whole rebuild from scratch type of thing, which is not a bad idea, right? We've done things for so long from an on-premise standpoint. Maybe it is time to kind of rebuild and rethink how we leverage the cloud and leverage some of these security offerings that the cloud providers have for us. So kind of think through these steps, evaluate, document, architect, educate, deploy, and then migrate your environments over there. So I'd like to pause just for a second here real quick and have Shannon ask us one more polling question.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, based on those steps, where do you find yourself? Are you still evaluating, documenting, architecting, educating, deploying, or maybe not applicable? And Steve, where do you think the majority of our audience is at this point? What would
I think they're still evaluating. I think they're still contemplating, is this the right thing? Because I know there's a lot of, and I'm seeing some of the questions that are coming on, and we're going to talk about these. There's still some concerns out there about the cloud, especially from an ArcGIS perspective.
All right, thanks for your votes. We're going to go ahead and close that poll. And there you have it.
Yeah, as I expected. That's fine, and that's great, and that's where you guys should be. Don't take the plunge until you really think this thing through, and educate yourself and those around you. But I will add, though, if you're in the evaluation mode, that using the cloud is so inexpensive that you can do some testing right now. Right, in your evaluation, you can, well, let's stand up one box, let's throw something out there, let's just see how it works. If I don't like it, I turn it off, and most I paid for it is for the few hours that I stood it up. We've done that many times over the years in helping our clients understand the usage of cloud. In fact, we do it still on a project level. We may have a project that come in and say, we need to stand up a large box because we need to process lots of this imagery data. Well, we'll stand up a box, we'll beef it up with GPU and memory and those kinds of things and just run our project. And when we're done, get the results, turn off the VM, and we're done with it, right? We're charged the amount of time that we've used that. Thanks for that polling question. All right, so let's go back here. So in summary, right, don't fear the cloud. We've talked about the aspects of the reliability of the cloud, the convenience, the security, the options out there that give you the advantages of leveraging certain components of the cloud, whether it's computing, whether it's storage, whether it's using it for disaster recovery or a passive production or a active production world, right? This pay-as-you-go model, the scalability, the flexibility, all those things play into this or should help you overcome the fear of using cloud, which also play a role right into the return of investment. Right? I showed you a couple of examples in there where we did some cost estimation for running ArcGIS Enterprise in the cloud versus on premise. Now there's still some questions out there. There's still some things that need to be discussed, especially around desktop. I know that some folks love to use dual monitors, right? Well, running in the cloud, you don't have that available yet to you. You have to kind of stretch out your screen to match the size there. But I can run certain processes, right? If I'm doing some high intensity 3D modeling or image processing or doing project-based work. So in some cases, you may still have a desktop on premise and then access the information through feature services, or in some cases, our clients have a hybrid approach where they have, their data in a enterprise geodatabase on premise with desktop, and then have synchronization processes in place to update the cloud for everything else. And so there's those things to kind of think about when dealing with the cloud. So I think at this point, we'll kind of switch over and look at what kind of questions that are out there to discuss.
Yeah, we've got a lot coming in and we're close to the top of the hour, so we're going to try to plow through these pretty quickly. What about isolating GIS from other on-premise solutions? So much value in organization systems talking with a comment.
So yeah, there's, and folks still do this today, right? Isolating your GIS from other business systems within your organization, and that's very viable, right? You can still do that, isolate that, but then you definitely have isolated that. Now you have that concept of isolating not only the GIS, but then everything that's needed to support that. The people, the hardware, the infrastructure, those kinds of things. So we're isolating that and keeping that secure is definitely doable and valuable. Don't discount the concept of moving that isolation to another environment, right? Just because it's on premise, this could be a private cloud inside of a cloud provider.
How does AppStream work when there's a need for local data?
Right. So it's a good one. So the term local then goes away, or does it? Right. So when you think about opening up your ArcGIS Pro inside of a browser, local to that browser is on that infrastructure. So your C drive is now local to ArcGIS Pro. So you kind of change the thought process. In your local is not, it's not physically sitting next to you. It's local to the instance of ArcGIS Pro. So your data sits on a C drive on ArcGIS Pro in the cloud, or you share a file share running. You use a data lake or an S3 bucket, right? And you put the common files that are shared across your organization in the cloud and in an infrastructure that is local to that environment, right? So if we went all cloud and did everything in the cloud, our local concept now moves to the cloud. So C drive no longer sits internally, it sits in the cloud. So you got to kind of rethink that concept there a little bit.
All right. Is there any point or reason to look for alternatives to major cloud providers such as AWS, Google, Azure? Do agencies typically bid out RFP?
Yeah, so yes on both. There's definitely a reason to look at all options, right? We had a really big project. I'll give you an example. We had a big project. We looked at AWS, we looked at Microsoft, we looked at Google, but it ended up being data pipes. Data pipes has a very nice security offering for federal solutions, and they provide a very private and secure cloud offering for those environments, for people that need maybe meet HIPAA requirements or FedRAMP or something like that. So it's definitely, so in that evaluation process, evaluate everything, right? Evaluate all the use cases and find the one that best fits your environment. And agencies, we have seen agencies go out to bid and do RFPs or RFQs to get more information about the different capabilities.
All right, we'll do one last question and we'll follow up with the rest of these at the conclusion of the webinar, likely send out an email with some of the Q&As, top Q&As. One said, you mentioned access controls as a key security component. Is there a specific tool within AWS to help control access, or is it managed within each component you displayed in your architecture?
So there are some tools and some services. So say you're an organization that uses Active Directory, right? You could piggyback off of that mechanism for your enterprise identification security model and have control that way. There's IP level access control. So typically what we like to do is when we have to do maintenance, or we have to remote desktop into those environments and do maintenance and updates. And so we can secure access by IP. We can set user identity level access and enterprise access. So there's several levels and several tools that I can deploy in order to give the right person the right access to the right component inside of my environment. Now, if you remember back at that display, we had this remote desktop gateway that was typically in the public subnet. That's where we usually have those kind of controls set up, and not inside of the private subnet to help with managing access to those environments there.
Very good. Well, that's all we have time for, folks. Thanks so much, Steve, for this presentation. Everyone on the phone, by the next week, you're going to receive an email with this webinar's episode recording link. We'll also send out some Q&A. And as a reminder, we'd greatly appreciate you completing this brief survey that'll appear on the screen momentarily. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of your day.